Shalom. This week we are reading Parashat Vayeshev. Begins in the book of Genesis, chapter 37. We start to learn about Yosef, Yosef Tzaddik, the righteous Joseph. Joseph, this very paragon, the very symbol of righteousness, very, very special person and part of the whole messianic scenario of redemption. Has a lot to give to this world, has a lot to offer, and he knows it. And he also knows that he has to be very careful. And he winds up in tremendous trouble right away in this week's Parsha. And, you know, it's not always easy to believe that you're connected to God. I wonder what Yosef was feeling. I wonder what he was going through. I believe that everybody really believes in God, even people that say that they don't. Especially when things go badly. Everyone wants to feel connected. Everyone wants to feel that there's someone out there that is in charge. There's someone that is handling things. There's someone that I can cry out to. And the question really is, how does a person know that he really is connected? So let's look at Yosef, for example, and realize that sometimes it's something very small. It's a fingerprint. It's like a divine fingerprint of God on your life that lets you know that something is going on. So Yosef HaTzadik, this tremendous righteous Yosef, he is betrayed by his brothers. His brothers want to kill him. And finally they throw him into a pit. They still want to kill him. Ultimately they sell him to a band of merchants, and he's sold over several times and finally winds up in Egypt. And let's look at this verse. Chapter 37 and verse 25 tells us they sat to eat food, the brothers of Yosef. After they put him in the pit, they raised their eyes and they saw, and behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead, their camels bearing spices, balsam and lotus, on their way to bring them down to Egypt. And the Holy Rashi has a very interesting comment on this verse. And as we've discussed many times, Rashi has tremendous prophetic insight into the depth and at the same time the simple meaning of the verse. And Rashi tells us as follows. He says, why did the Torah bother to publicize what this caravan of Ishmaelites were carrying? They were carrying spices, balsam, lotus. Rashi says, why did the Torah publicize their burden? He says, to let you know the reward of the righteous. For it is customary for Arabs to carry only kerosene and tar, whose odor is foul. But for this one, meaning for the righteous Joseph, it was arranged, meaning from heaven, that they should be carrying spices, so that he should not be afflicted by a foul odor. And this, of course, Rashi actually citing from our sages, the Mechilta. Now I want to ask you, look at Yosef, everything that he's going through. He is alone in the world. He was torn away from his loving father. His brothers want to kill him. They throw him into this pit full of scorpions and snakes, and then they take him out of the pit and they sell him. They sell him down the river. What difference does it make what it smells like in the caravan? I mean, is that really such an issue? Yosef at that time, totally abandoned, totally alone in the world, away from his father, betrayed by his brothers, an uncertain future. But Rashi tells us that God was arranging something here, because normally these caravans have really horrible smelling stuff, but for Yosef HaTzadik it was prearranged that this caravan would be bearing sweet spices. But I ask you, as if that will mitigate to such a large extent the suffering of the righteous Yosef? I mean, how important is that? Unless you realize Yosef knew very well that he has a very strong connection to God, and that everything that he has to go through is for the good of his people, for the good of the world. And it was a difficult place to be in. And what he was really looking for, in the midst of all of this terrible travail and turmoil and suffering, he was looking for a little sign. He was looking for the divine fingerprint on his life so that he would know that he's not off the radar. And this was it. It might seem very insignificant. It might seem almost trivial, considering what he was going through. But no, this is the signal that this is part of a plan. This is kind of, if you would, a wink. This is the fingerprint. And you know, it's interesting that these Torah portions of Yosef always fall out during the time of Hanukkah. During the time of Hanukkah, we will always be reading about Yosef, and indeed, next week, we begin to celebrate the festival of Hanukkah. And on deepest level, there are many connections between the themes that are associated with the righteous Joseph and the themes of Hanukkah. But right now, I just want to explore very superficially one idea that's very similar. Because you know, the miracle that occurred for our forefathers, the time of Hanukkah, was very well publicized. The most famous aspect of the Hanukkah miracles is this one cruse of oil that was discovered to bear the seal of the high priest, to bear witness that it was not tainted, it hadn't been sullied, it was still pure. And everybody knows the story of the oil, that it wasn't enough to last, but it did last. But you know, if you think about that miracle just a little bit deeper, you know, that oil was found by the Kohanim in the holy part of the Holy Temple. And originally, that great miracle was only known by this one particular family of the priesthood, because they were the ones that had access to that part of the temple. They were the ones that had the authority to touch that oil and to use it, and to begin to rekindle the menorah in the Holy Temple. Now, if God wanted to make a miracle, to strengthen and empower and give a signal to the whole Jewish people, why didn't he choose something that would have been easier to publicize, something that would have been more applicable and equal in status to all the Jewish people? Instead, he made a miracle that would have a direct impact on a very small group of people, meaning the Kohanim. Well, it was this same family of Kohanim who were conducting the terrible and difficult war against the Greeks. It was the same family of Kohanim who took responsibility, who took the leadership of the Jewish people. And they were the ones who had some very difficult decisions. They were the ones who had difficult moments to face. What was it like for them, the Kohanim, that were at the head of the raging battle? They knew that they have to stand up for the honor of God. They knew that they have to do something about those that had entered into the land of Israel and those that were trying to subjugate them and to erase the Torah and to destroy the temple. But the casualties mounted up all the time, tens of thousands and more of Jews that were being killed in this war. And indeed, after the temple was secured, the war continued to rage for many years. And perhaps the Kohanim, like Yosef, were looking for some little sign that they knew that they were doing the will of God, but that connection was still strong, that they were still on the radar. And this was the sign. And this is another beautiful similarity between Yosef and Hanukkah, because just as Yosef found the imprint of this divine fingerprint on his life through something apparently so trivial and meaningless as the sweet smell of the spices in the caravan that was tormenting him and taking him down into servitude, but he said, this doesn't compute. There's something about this picture. God is in control. So too, the Kohanim who found that oil, they realized, you know what? It's all worth it. This is what Hashem wants us to do. We are doing the right thing no matter what. And this was a signal to them to know that the imprint of the fingerprint was on their life and that they were indeed still on Hashem's radar. And all of us want to feel that connection. All of us want to know that really we're still on his radar. But the question is, do we really have what it will take to see that we are on his radar? And once we know that that divine fingerprint is on our lives as well, what will we do?